What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This program is just for you non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, don't know quite where to turn, well, you can certainly turn to us. And here is our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the number 1 and then 205-271-2985. And of course, you can always send us an email. The address for that, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Now, those of you who are Catholic, maybe you've got a friend or a coworker, a family member who has questions about the Catholic faith, you're welcome to call as well, 833-288-EWTN. All right, and let's see here. Charles Berry is our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. Jeff Burson is on social media. If you want to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook, we're streaming there right now. Just put your question in the comments box. Jeff will see it. He'll send it to us here in the studio, and hopefully we can answer your question on today's program. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing decent. Thank you.
Interesting question here from James. He says, Dr. Anders often speaks against the Calvinist view of predestination. Well, if God doesn't transfer our punishment to Jesus, what does he do? Doesn't St. Augustine support Calvin on this position?
Okay, thanks. So I think the question may be confusing two Catholic doctrines or two Christian doctrines. One of them is the question of predestination. The other one is the nature of the atonement.
Okay.
And those are two different questions. So let me deal with each of them in turn. When it comes to the question of predestination, the Catholic Church has a doctrine of predestination because the idea is a scriptural one. You find St. Paul talking about predestination, and St. John's Gospel also has some, we'll call it predestinarian ideas in it.
Okay.
And the biblical term proorzo, this Greek word that is translated predestination, means basically to mark out in advance. And the idea is that God knows in advance those who are going to be saved. And in Catholic theology, it's even a little bit more robust than that. You can't be saved without God's grace. And God knows in advance those to whom he's going to give the grace that will efficaciously, effectively lead them to salvation. And that is not the case for everyone. So not everybody is saved. Some people are. It's not because they're such great people. It is because it's a result of God's grace. And that much is Catholic doctrine. Now, what's hasn't been defined in Catholic doctrine is what's the basis for God's foreknowledge and his determination to give that effective grace. And there are some Catholic theologians that just say, well, you know, God's purposes are inscrutable. He does it his way, and that's all there is to it. Typically, in the Thomist school, that's the solution. There's another view in Catholic theology that's also allowable, which says that God foresees the free use that we will make of his grace. And so he is able to give grace in accordance with his foreknowledge of our free human actions. So they'll make good use of that grace. I'll give some grace over here. Now, the Thomistic theologians don't like that because they say, well, that really makes the determination lodged somehow or another in our agency, in our acts, our freedom. And that would seem to smack of the heresy of Pelagianism, which says it's a work of God's grace. It's not a matter of our freedom. It's God's grace. But the folks that like that view would counter to the Dominicans, to the Thomists, and say, yeah, but you guys are tending a little bit towards fatalism and Manichaeism. And so what's the solution? And Catholic theologians actually debated this in the 16th century. They took both those positions to the Pope, and the Pope said, I'll think about it, and I'll let you know what I've decided, and it's 500 years later, and we're still waiting. So there are multiple ways of skinning that apple in Catholic theology. Even though those contradict one another, they're both permissible Catholic opinions. The important thing is the idea that God foreknows those who will be saved, And they're not saved without his grace. It's really because of his active grace in their lives that they come to that salvation. Now, that's different from what Calvin believed. What Calvin believed about predestination was that God positively determined that before the foundation of the world, that one group of people would go to heaven and that another determinate group of people would go to hell. So in the Calvinist scheme, there is a group of people that God created for the express purpose of damning them. And this is the so-called doctrine of double predestination, the idea that God would positively decree the damnation of a soul before its creation for his own inscrutable purposes. And that obviously makes God into a tyrant, and that doctrine has sent shivers down the spines of most fair-thinking people throughout history. Now, you raised a different question about the nature of the atonement. What is it that happens to Christ on the cross? And the Calvinist view that you correctly stated is that God imputes our sin to Jesus, transfers our guilt to Christ, and that God the Father punishes Jesus for sins that we commit. That's the Calvinist view. And in turn, according to the Calvinists, God acquits us on account of Jesus' righteousness. Now, the problem with that from a Catholic point of view, first of all, is that's not biblical. The Scriptures never say that. They say nothing like that. And secondly, that view makes God, again, into a tyrant, because it has God acquitting the guilty and punishing the innocent. And if you met a judge, if somebody ran for judge in your community and said, I have a great plan to cut down on crime, I will punish the innocent and acquit the guilty, that judge is not going to get elected.
No,
right? That's the definition of injustice, not justice. And so a third reason that that is absurd is because it suggests that God the Son and God the Father could be at enmity with one another. And that is impossible because they share one essence, one divine nature. So they can't possibly be at enmity in that way, unless you imagine a really faulty view of Jesus. So the Catholic view, which is biblical, it's grounded in the teachings of sacred Scripture, is that the death of Christ is a sacrifice of atonement. You look at the Hebrew Scriptures, say Leviticus chapter 5, to explicate what that is. Basically, a sacrifice of atonement means that the worshiper brings something of value to offer to God, not so that God can impute your sins to it and punish the victim of the sacrifice, but rather as a gift out of love, the worshiper brings and offers something up of value, in the same way that I might give my wife a bunch of flowers.
Sure.
Not so she can take out her wrath on them, but, to make up for something that I might have done wrong.
David, actually James, thank you so much for your question. In a moment, we're going to get to David, now I got it right, in Claremont, Florida. Also Tom in Dallas. We have a line open for you as well at 833-288-EWTN. It's called A Communion with Dr. David Andrews here on EWTN. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with David in Claremont, Florida, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, David, what's on your mind today, sir?
Well, thank you so much for taking my call, Dr. Andrews. Tom. My wife and I are late-in-life converts to the Catholic faith. I would say that we are faithful, prayerful, studious, and Orthodox believers. However, we did not raise our children in any faith, and they range. We have 4 children. They range from a faithful Catholic to an atheist. But we have one daughter who I think is definitely interested in the Catholic faith. She's middle-aged, late 40s, has a birthday coming up soon. We're interested in getting a book for her that might introduce her to the Catholic faith. Something that's an entry-level, book that would maybe pique her interest. Do you have something you would like to recommend?
Wow, that's a great question. Book recommendations are always tricky because they depend entirely on the character of the person who's reading them. And so you kind of have to make a prescription based on the particular patient. But, there are a number of books that come to mind that are generally approachable. Some of the older, earlier 20th century books on Catholicism, anything by Frank Sheed, Theology and Sanity, for example, is one. Really anything Sheed wrote would be appropriate. Ronald Knox, The Belief of Catholics, Carl Adam, The Spirit of Catholicism. A little bit closer temporally, a lot of people like Scott Hahn's book, Rome, Sweet Home.
Yes.
If it wouldn't sound too self-serving, I wrote a book called The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, published by EWTN.
I was just going to mention that.
Really kind of goes through sort of all the reasons why people would reject Catholicism, and then the benefits of becoming Catholic. What is the real motive? What's the payoff at the end of the day for becoming Catholic, not just doctrinally, but in the deepest areas of your life, like your marital life, for example. So all those are possibilities. The Coming Home Network has published a number of volumes of conversion stories of people from various backgrounds who have give their reasons for becoming Catholic. Those volumes are all very interesting. And also, I know you're interested in the book, but one of the most popular shows on EWTN, of course, is The Journey Home.
Yes.
And there's something about the power of conversion narratives that just appeals to everyone.
And I think also that whole idea of sharing a story, sharing a life story. This is my journey. Maybe it could be applicable for you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There you go, David. Some great resources there. Thanks so much for your call. We hope that's helpful. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're watching us on TV today, you can participate as well. Our email address, ctc@ewtn.com. Let's go now to Tom in Dallas, listening on Sirius XM, channel 130. Tom, what's on your mind today, sir?
Another confusion with a Bible study that I'm at. We were talking about God and what how great he is and what he's capable of doing, and someone said what he's capable of doing, or she, and it was implied. I'm saying, are you saying God could potentially be a female? And they go, well, God can do anything, and actually there's something in the Catechism which helps support that. I had never heard that before.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, if a person wanted to assert that God was a biological female, or for that matter, that God was a biological male, either one of those assertions would be absurd and manifestly false, heretical, in fact. The Catholic Church defines God as eternal, immutable, almighty, unchangeable, incomprehensible, and ineffable. Of absolutely simple essence, substance, or nature. Well, no biological entity that is sexed comes anywhere close to meeting that description. A metaphysically simple entity that is immeasurable, almighty, and unchangeable, and incomprehensible. Right? Yeah. That is not a description of any biological entity that is sexually dimorphic or has sexual reproduction. That's absolutely absurd. Now, if someone wanted to assert that some of the attributes that are stereotypically assigned to female humans could be predicated of God, that'd be 100% true.
Okay.
So, like this may sound sexist, I don't mean to. Like many people think, well, women are maybe more gentle than men. Well, that depends on the woman, obviously, but that's a kind of a common stereotype.
Sure.
Well, could we predicate gentleness of God? Well, sure. All right. Maternal is often used as a word to convey the idea of a kind of care or solicitude for the weak or the suffering or the small. Mm-hmm. Well, could I predicate that kind of maternal sensitivity to the Godhead, that God is caring to those that are small or poor or weak? Of course, absolutely, that'd be entirely appropriate. And in fact, there's almost anything that is a creature, whether it's a man, a woman, a dog, a cat, a coffee cup, a rock, a sky, or a cloud, has some quality about it that I can analogously predicate, that means to speak of, God. A cloud is beautiful. It's kind of awe-inspiring. It inspires wonder. All of those things could also be said of God. And so that we can always draw ideas from the material world as analogies, and the key word there is an analogy for understanding the Godhead. When it comes to paternity, are there things about human paternity that I can predicate of God? Absolutely, right? Now, when you talk about the names that we use in liturgical worship or in creedal formula to define God, again, the Catholic tradition is very clear. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons in one absolutely simple essence or nature, right? We don't say Mother, Daughter, and Holy Spirit. We say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I know that there are people who get agitated about that and say, well, that's sexed language, and that seems to exclude femininity from the Godhead. Well, we've just said the manner in which you can speak about God as feminine, not as a biological femininity. And so the question is raised, well, then why use this kind of language at all? What's the purpose of it? And historically, the image of fatherhood is distinct from the mother goddess imagery from ancient Babylonian or Mesopotamian religion. And if you go back and read the creation narratives like the Enuma Elish, for example, from Babylon, the feminine image of a god standing at the root of creation usually is there's a kind of connection between the body of the feminine deity and the world. I mean, the image of parturition, particularly when you have a pre-modern understanding of what's taking place, is that there's something sort of broken off from the body of the feminine godhead that becomes the material world. And in the Enuma Elish, actually, the feminine god is actually killed, and her body parts are distributed to make the sky dome and the earth underneath. And in our experience, the relationship of paternity to generation is one that is more remote. There's less physical intimacy between a father and his offspring than between a mother and her offspring, because it doesn't come forth from his body in quite the same way.
Right.
And so that image of paternity, which is not a literal description of God's biology, he has no biology, really underscores that note of divine transcendence. And in the same way, the relationship of father to son in the Trinity is one of generation, not parturition. And that's the only thing that we can say about the relationship of father to son. Nothing else about fatherhood or sonship is implied other than paternity to filiation, generation as opposed to parturition, which again underscores that note of divine transcendence.
Okay. Tom, is that helpful for you?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for your call. Call to communion here on EWTN. We have a line open for you right now at 833-288-EWTN if you have a question for Dr. David Anders, or if you'd like to explain to us what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic. 833-288-3986. Let's go to Rob now in Connecticut listening on YouTube. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hi, gentlemen. How are you?
Very well, thank you for your call.
My wife and I, we're a pair of some 41-year-olds, and we have two teenage daughters, and one's going through a rebellious punk phase at the moment, and, she's always saying stuff to us like, I don't want to waste my time because I'm become another casualty of society. I'll never fall in line, become another victim of your conformity, and I'm wondering, how can I bring her to the church if she's just got this rebellious attitude?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. I am not the world's greatest expert on parenting, and I'm not a therapist or psychologist. Dr. Ray or Dr. Popchak would be better at that than I am. But I'll give you my 2 cents worth as a Catholic person who's raised 5 children and has had varying degrees of success in keeping them in the church, right? Based on your description, I think the thing that is least likely to work is a kind of enforced Catholicism. I think you might be able to keep her in the pews on Sunday morning, but it's the second she can get out of there, she's going to get out of there. I think the issue that you have to work on primarily is that attitude, not the Catholicism per se, but a relationship to her parents, her relationship to her peers, and probably her relationship to media. Again, I've made a lot of mistakes as a parent. One thing that I did that was not a mistake, with some of my children, I put off cell phones and media as long as I possibly could. And all of, whether or not you're Catholic, all of the demographic and psychological literature just underscores how terribly detrimental social media and the internet and cell phones and smartphones and so forth are to the psychological health of young people, girls in particular.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I understand separating a teenager from their cell phone is that may be the hardest task that any parent has ever had to face in their life. But I really think it's at the element of personal virtue, interfamilial relationships, and relationship to media and one's peers where you really have to put the emphasis. Mm-hmm. And also, in making changes to your parenting style, I think it's incredibly important to let the consequences do all the talking. And in your own personal interaction with your kids, to always be positive and affirming and loving. And, if you lay down a rule, and the rule might be, we're not gonna have any internet use after, 6 o'clock at night. It's shut off after that. And the consequences for violating that rule are going to be blank. I'm just making this up, obviously.
Sure.
And then the histrionics begin, and the yelling and the screaming begin, and the fighting begins. You have to be decided in advance, I'm not responding. It takes two people to fight. I'm not going to engage. I'm not going to lower myself to that level. Mm-hmm. And then when the misbehavior happens, oh, I'm so sorry. You've lost your phone for a week because we told you not to do that, and you did that. But I'm not lecturing. There's no lecture that follows, no explanation, no rationale, no justification.
None needed.
Just a consequence.
Yeah.
Right? And the more you get drawn into rationalizing, like kids do not want to know the reason. They want to know the rationalization that they can defeat.
Yeah.
Right? And so you let the consequences talk. All of your interactions with the child are positive, encouraging. You look so nice. You look so pretty. I love the purple hair. You're just such a great daughter. Everything's positive because you really want to build as much trust and love as you can while simultaneously trying to protect them from their own self-destructive and self-deceptive behaviors.
Yeah. Rob, thanks so much for your call. We hope that's helpful for you and probably quite a few of our listeners who are going through that same little trip right now. It's called a communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Rob in Grand Rapids, listening on the great Holy Family Radio. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today, sir?
Yeah, appreciate you taking my call. Wondered about predestination. I was talking to someone about that the other day, and they brought up the passage about the jars, the vessels that were made for destruction, and he said that shows that God actually creates some people and basically kind of saying they don't have any free will to be destroyed. Wondered your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So St. Paul never says that God created people to be vessels of destruction. What he says is, if God did this, he would be just. That's an interesting argument, and how literally we should take that as good theodicy, good philosophy of religion, is another question altogether. But I don't think that Paul actually asserts that is what happened. I would also remind you that if you read Romans 9-11 in context, Paul's concern is not so much with the fate of individual souls as it is with the fate of nations and ethnic groups. And his primary point of reference is the relationship of Jews to Gentiles and believing and unbelieving Jews. And it's not the Calvinist view that Paul is talking about the fate of specific individuals foreordained from the beginning of the world.
Okay. Appreciate that. And Rob, thank you so much for your call from Grand Rapids. Interesting situation here that we have a couple of lines open. So if you call right now, we can hopefully get you on today's program called A Communion with Dr. David Anders. The number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. After the break, we'll be talking with Mike in Massachusetts, also Bob in Washington. We could be talking with you as well. 833-288-EWTN. Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Do stay with us. It's called the Communion here on EWTN. Glad you're with us today. I want to send out some congratulations here to another member of the EWTN radio family, and that would be AM 1260 The Rock in Cleveland. They are now celebrating their 8th year with us. Congratulations to Bernadette Boguski, Dick Russ, and the great team at AM 1260 in Cleveland from your friends here at EWTN Radio. All right, back to the phones right now at 833-288-EWTN. We'll continue here with Mike in Massachusetts, listening online, EWTN.com. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. So I recently heard a quote that I believe was attributed to St. Anselm that masses for the living are something like 1,000 times more efficacious than masses for the dead. And I'm wondering if that's true, and if so, if Dr. Anders could help me understand or reconcile that.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. So I'm not so sure that the quantitative proportions are universally the same in every case, right? You know, I mean, if you can measure an actual 1,000-fold increase in benefit to the living over the dead. However, the idea that masses for the living have a benefit that masses for the dead do not have, that is true. That is Catholic dogma. And the reason why is that the dead, even the souls in purgatory, can no longer merit. They can no longer merit. So whatever merit they have at the end of their human life, that's the merit for which they will be rewarded in the next life.
Okay.
But with the living, I mean, you could say a mass, for example, for someone's conversion. Let me reframe that. Like, you take somebody that's living a halfway decent Catholic life, but far from sanctity, and someone has a mass said for that person, and maybe the goal is a growth in holiness or the overcoming of a habitual sin or something like that. And that person responds to that grace and it launches to the next level in the spiritual life. The sky is really quite literally the limit to how far you can go. I mean, you can progress in the spiritual life all the way to perfect union with God, and acquire merit all the way and look forward to a much better eternity. Whereas, you know, if you sort of barely squeak into purgatory, all the masses in the world will just accomplish your getting out of purgatory. They will not knock you to the front of the line in heaven.
Mike, thanks so much for your call. Let's go to Bob now. Bob is in Washington State, listening online also. Oh, no, on the EWTN app. How about that? And if you don't have it on your phone, it is a free download. Hey, Bob, let's go to you next. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi there, boys. Just right off the bat, I want to say that your screen caller, Matt, is really a nice guy, and he's really smart, too. I just wanted to tell everybody out there that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. My question, it may be a silly question, but maybe not. My question is, I'm not a Catholic, and I'm just curious, if purgatory is a real thing, is that open to everybody, or is that just a Catholic thing?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. Purgatory is open to any human being that dies in the state of grace and that stands in need of further purification. So the two groups excluded from purgatory would be the damned and the saints.
Okay.
But if you fall in between those two extremes, then purgatory is your fate.
The holy mud room.
Right, exactly. And you don't have to present your Catholic credentials at the door to get into purgatory. So I remember before I was Catholic years ago when I was in college, I had a Catholic friend who had carried this Catholic Q&A, this question-answer book, with him to college. And I picked it up in his dorm room one day, and I flipped through it, and my eyes lit on a question. What happens to a Protestant that doesn't believe in purgatory? Answer: he goes to purgatory.
Love it.
You know, so sure, you'll find all types in purgatory, even as you'll find all types in heaven and in hell. And I might add, you're going to find Catholics in hell, and you'll find some non-Catholics in heaven.
Could be some surprises ahead.
Could be some surprises.
All right, Bob, thanks so much for your call. Let's go now to Bill in Pennsylvania, listening on JMJ Radio, our great partner there in the western Pennsylvania area. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today, sir?
Well, thank you, first of all, for being there, both of you. I recently attended a Mennonite social service where the neighborhood pretty much was invited, and they had kind of a play going on where they mentioned the name of William Tyndale and how the Roman Catholic Church condemned him. That was brought out specifically. Could Dr. Anders give some background on William Tyndale and the famous Tyndale Bible?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So actually, look, the Catholic Church has sanctioned the persecution of heretics in the past. Tyndale just wasn't top of their list. The person who was responsible for the persecution of William Tyndale was the Protestant king Henry VIII. So, I mean, Mary Tudor had a lot of people killed in England when she was a Catholic monarch. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely have our share. We have the share of blood on our hands.
Sure.
But in this case, it was actually Henry VIII, because Tyndale, like the Catholic Church, opposed Henry's annulment and remarriage. He like John the Baptist, he thought, you can't be messing around with other men's wives, and you got to stick with the one you got. And Henry didn't like that, so he separated from the Pope and went after William Tyndale. When it comes to Tyndale's Bible translation, Tyndale believed in translating the Bible into the vernacular. And he was not the first person to do that by any stretch of the imagination. The Catholic Church has been translating the Bible into the vernacular, the common tongue of peoples, for 2,000 years. There was a period of history in the late Middle Ages, 13th and 14th, well, no, really 14th and 15th centuries, when Bible translation became controversial. It hadn't been controversial before, but it became controversial for a very specific reason. In the Latin West, as the language of liturgy and the language of the Church became separated from the language of the people, not because Latin changed, but because the vernacular changed. So people became less and less capable of understanding the liturgical language. A kind of discipline of the secret, if you will, emerged around the celebration of the liturgy. And people became quite accustomed to the idea that, the clergy had their language and the people had their other language, and there was a kind of secrecy involved there and a kind of mystique to it.
Really?
Yeah, and this was accidental. I mean, this wasn't something like the Catholic Church set out to obscure the language of liturgy from the people. It just organically developed because vernaculars change over the centuries.
Okay.
But the liturgy didn't. The liturgy had more or less was consistent. I mean, there were variations according to region, but just as organic development of the thing, the world woke up one day and people realized, hey, I no longer understand the language of the Mass. What am I going to do about it? And it became a point of controversy, particularly in 14th century England, under the influence of a man named John Wycliffe, not Tyndale, but Wycliffe. And Wycliffe had a number of revolutionary ideas. Bible translation was only one of them. One of the things that Wycliffe advocated was the idea that a person who had jurisdiction, either in the church or the state, should lose that sovereignty, should lose that jurisdiction if they were in the state of sin, so that people would only be obligated to obey rulers that were in the state of grace. Now, sitting in the 21st century, looking at that idea, it strikes me as one of the stupidest ideas that ever occurred in political philosophy, right? Not that I'm in favor of sinful rulers, but it is impossible to know if someone is in the state of sin or the state of grace.
Sure.
And the idea that you could legitimate anarchy simply by implying that whoever the leader was at the time was in the state of sin would just guarantee perpetual anarchy. And so there was a very much a populist element to Wycliffe's view, and a very socially revolutionary element to Wycliffe's view, and it was totally unworkable as a political philosophy, as it would be today, and was rightly regarded as, by all authorities in church and state, as very dangerous.
Yeah.
Now, because ideas like this got allied to Bible translation, right? Because Wycliffe let's make theological knowledge and theological language and biblical knowledge available to the laity. This will aid and abet in their revolutionary efforts to overthrow corrupt ecclesiastical authority and corrupt civil authority. You can see how the authorities, whether the king or the church, would take a dim view about Bible translation in that particular context.
Right.
Now, Bible translation really came back to the fore again in the Reformation and became a serious issue. And an ideology around the translation of the Bible emerged, particularly in the writings of John Calvin, the Swiss reformer John Calvin, who held that if you put the Bible into the vernacular, this wasn't exactly Wycliffe's view, but you can see the common ideas. If you put the Bible in the vernacular and you make vernacular preaching the centerpiece of Christian worship, then societal reform will necessarily follow. and you will eliminate idleness and crime and all kinds of social ills will go away if you can just put the Bible into the vernacular and preach it in the vernacular. Well, again, that was a ridiculously naive view. It was Calvin's view. We've had the Bible in the vernacular for 500 years, and it did not eliminate crime or civil discord. In fact, it brought very much the opposite conclusion. But because, again, the idea was allied to a Protestant agenda that was explicitly anti-Catholic and anti-papal, the church kept finding itself on the other side of the Bible translation debate. This is really only in the late Middle Ages and early modernity. But at the same time, there were Catholic reformers that were also advocating for increased use of the vernacular. And, of course, the church did put the Bible in the vernacular. The Douay Rheims version of the Bible in English, for example, is an early modern translation of the Bible, ecclesiastical approved version in English. The other problem with Bible translations that were produced by reformers like Tyndale or the Geneva Bible or the Luther Bible is that their translators had theological agenda. And they were skewing the translation to underscore or to emphasize Protestant doctrines. And that's problematic as well. The church has always done vernacular translation. There was a period of history where it was controversial for reasons that were largely political and social. But even then, the church still ultimately has translated the Bible into the vernacular.
Well, there you go, Bill. Thanks so much for your question. Call to Communion here on EWTN Radio. Tom Price reminding you to join us for Open Line Tuesday with our friend Father Wade Menezes every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern with an encore at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Always got a great show with Father Wade. All right, let's go now to Maria in Boston, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Maria, what's on your mind today?
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I was calling because my son had a question for me yesterday and I couldn't answer it. We're Roman Catholic. And his question was, were Adam and Eve the first humans that went to hell? And if they weren't, then how did they get out of it? Because there were no priests around to go to confession.
Sure.
And it was as far.
Yeah, I can answer that. Thank you so much. So Adam and Eve more than likely did not go to hell, and they were saved by the grace of Christ the same way that you and I are saved by the grace of Christ. And they would have gone to heaven by believing the promise of God, repenting of their sins, and reforming their lives, just like you and I would. Now, what's the difference between the experience of Adam and Eve and our experience is that, first of all, the will of God is far more manifest to us today because we have the entirety of biblical revelation as well as deeper Christian reflection on natural revelation. So our understanding of the good and of the will of God is much clearer and more manifest. The promise of God is also much clearer and more manifest to us because we live this side of the incarnation. You know, St. Peter says about the incarnation that that angels longed to look into it, that the prophets themselves longed to look into the truth that the Spirit within them was prophesying when he spoke of the sufferings of Christ and the glories to follow. So those of the Old Covenant had a kind of inchoate, weak, and shadowy conception about what God had planned to do. Our knowledge is far more explicit. Another way in which we have the advantage is that we have sacraments that are intrinsically efficacious, so that when I submit myself for baptism, for example, I am genuinely born again through the waters of baptism. I receive sanctifying grace necessarily through the sacrament of baptism, provided I don't put up any obstacles. Adam and Eve did not have the sacrament of baptism or any of the other sacraments, and so they didn't have a tangible sign like that to which they could attach themselves with the guarantee of that efficacy. It would have been through their own petition, you know, God moving them to ask for grace in some form without that tangible point of contact. So that's a little bit trickier, and it makes the persevering in grace that much harder, but not impossible.
Okay. And Maria, thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Earl now here on Call to Communion, listening in Omaha on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Earl, what's on your mind today, sir?
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. My wife and I were raised Catholic. We've raised our kids Catholic, and we've gone to church, and we've wondered how can the host the body of Christ be offered in a gluten-free form when it's the body of Christ?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the question. So one of the things the Church says about the Eucharist, emphatically, I mean, this is very much a part of the dogma of the Eucharist, is that all of the properties of wheat and wine remain, all of them. That's why the Eucharist tastes like bread and tastes like wine. All the properties. So if you have an allergy or an intolerance to wheat, for example, and obviously my physiology is poor here, but whatever is that property of wheat that causes that physiological reaction in you must necessarily remain in the consecrated host. Now, if the priest consecrated the host and the property of bread or some property of bread ceased to exist, so say, let's take, for example, the property of causing a gluten reaction in gluten intolerant people. If that went away after the consecration, it would no longer be the Eucharist. If the priest consecrated the Eucharist and it no longer looked like bread, it would not be the Eucharist. It would be something else, but it wouldn't be the Eucharist. If it stopped tasting like bread, if it stopped smelling like bread, if it stopped reacting with your body like bread, it would not be the Eucharist. The Eucharist is that thing that has all of the properties of bread, but the substance of Christ's body and blood. So we don't teach that it is Christ's body and blood without qualification. We teach it is the substance of Christ's body and blood, but all of the properties, the accidents is the technical word, of bread and wine. That's essential to the definition. So if it didn't cause a gluten reaction, it wouldn't be the Eucharist. It'd be something else.
Okay, so it would be like a very mild gluten reaction. Is that the idea?
Well, I'm saying if you have a gluten reaction to bread, you will have a gluten reaction to the host. Period. Because by definition, none of the properties of bread are gone. Only the substance of the bread is gone. It's the substance of Christ's body and blood. Now, what many people do is they will manufacture a host that has a very low gluten content in the hopes that it will not trigger a gluten reaction in people who have such a reaction.
Great question, Earl. Thanks so much for your call. Let's go to Dan now in Idaho, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Dan, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hey, I have a friend who's getting into Hinduism. I called a little while ago, a few weeks ago, about this, but he has a different question now, or a different complaint. He says that anything created in time is bound to die, and that he says that's a logical necessity. So the concept of ab eternity, where we're created and then continue to exist in perpetuity, he says that's illogical. Is that illogical?
You'd have to show me the contradiction, because I don't see any contradiction there at all. And I would say it is absolutely false that anything created in time is bound to die. I can think of exceptions right off the top of my head. So the character of Gandalf in fiction, for example, is something created in time.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But the character of Gandalf is not a biological entity. I see absolutely no reason to suggest that it is necessary that the character of Gandalf cease to exist. It will continue to exist eternally as a fictional character. That's perfectly intelligible to me. So there is an exception to his rule.
Yeah. Dan, thanks so much for your call. Call to communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Grand Rapids, Michigan now. Talk with Dustin, listening on the great Holy Family Radio. Hello, Dustin. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. Trying to think what his name was. Rob. He had the two daughters, the one rebellious one.
Yes.
Yeah.
He had said his daughter would say things like, "I won't be a victim of conformity" and stuff. Basically, all she's quoting is a song by Sum 41. It's a rock band from back in the 2000s. I would just watch the music she's listening to. It's very influential. My kids do the same thing. They want to listen to very negative rap music. I found a lot of very good Christian like rock and roll bands or rap musicians or artists, that their stuff is all positive and pointed towards Christ and God the Father.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And when you mentioned picking up the phrase, "I will not be a victim of your conformity," or something to that effect, from some pop song, there is a serious irony baked into that should be evident on the face of it, which is that the person who makes that assertion is, of course, conforming to a popular media trope. It reminds me of the line in the Monty Python movie, "Yes, we are all individuals."
That's right.
Yeah, you're going to conform to something. Like
Sure.
we are not just amorphous blobs that don't take on any shape at all. We're all shaped by the culture. It's the question is, what institutions are going to shape us? What ideas are going to shape us? And this is the naivete of adolescence, that they always think that they're above conformity as they go to school, passionate to look and dress and sound like every one of their peers.
Oh, yeah. And our producer points out that the song is called Fat Lip by Sum 41. Okay.
Well,
I don't want to waste my time, become another casualty of society. I'll never fall in line, become another victim of your conformity and back down. Okay.
You know, that was not that original when The Who came up with this idea in my generation.
That's right.
And so this has become a very common meme, ever since the 1960s.
Seems to me we could do a whole show just on music.
Enjoyably.
And probably have a lot of fun with it, too. I do appreciate that, Dustin. Thanks so much for your call. Here's an email from Bob. The church issues many official papers, documents from church councils, encyclicals, motu proprios, instructions from the dicasteries, many others. Is there a hierarchy of authority or precedence among all of these? Are documents ever canceled or superseded or simply ignored?
Okay, yes, sure. There is absolutely a hierarchy among documents.
Okay.
And different document types are used for different kinds of announcements. But ultimately, the weight of a document depends less on the genre in which it is published and more on the language that's used within it and the person that's promulgating it. So when something is published in the Pope's very own name, and he does so because he intends to teach a matter of Christian faith or practice, and particularly if he uses the language of infallibility, that would be the highest level of authority.
Mm-hmm.
He can teach in his ordinary teaching office, his ordinary magisterium, without invoking infallibility, but he can still do so in a solemn and commanding way. And it wouldn't command the assent of faith, but it would command religious submission of the mind and will. When the Pope issues a legal judgment in a motu proprio, for example, it doesn't require the assent of faith or the submission of mind and will. It just requires obedience. It's like if the Pope says, all right, we're going to use, we're going to use this version of the Lord's Prayer or something.
Yeah.
That's probably a bad example. I'm just kind of making something up off the top of my head. Well, it's not a question of true or false. It's a question of sir, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Like he can make a legal ruling. When it comes to the question of different dicasteries and offices and so forth, sometimes they can operate more explicitly within the Pope's own teaching office. Sometimes it's very understandable that you've got maybe a body of theologians that's doing a kind of exploratory examination of some particular topic, and it's a point of reference, but it doesn't have nearly the same level of authority.
Bob, thanks so much for your question. We'll close out with this one from Martin. A few days ago, you said words to the effect that current progressive forces seem to be trying to rid us of conscience as a valid, reasonable mode. Could you expand on this interesting point and why you think this is the case?
Well, I think it's the case because appeals to conscience seem to be shut down in popular discourse if those appeals to conscience violate the norms of the spirit of the age. And I'm thinking in particular about these highly contentious issues related to sex and sexual identity and gender and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a witch hunt in certain circles out for anybody that it's not enough not to it's not enough not to contradict the reigning regime. Like it seems to me that the forces that want you to positively affirm it, and if you don't, then you're just dismissed as a bigot.
Or back in the day when a parent would say, "You're going to eat this and you're going to like it."
Right, exactly.
I'll eat it, may not like it. Very good. And Martin, thanks so much for your email. Dr. David Anders, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
We do this program Monday through Friday on EWTN Radio at 2 p.m. Eastern with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. on the West Coast. You can check out the podcast anytime you wish. Charles will have today's program posted in a few hours at EWTNradio.net, EWTNradio.net. On behalf of our fantastic team here, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders. Hey, thanks for joining us on this edition of Call to Communion. We will see you next time. Have a great day and God bless.